it's not unrealistic for the Labour Party to be picking up around 30 seats or so, while the SNP may well find themselves with perhaps no more than around 18.
Well, let's now catch up with Britain's leading polling expert, Sir John Curtice. John, welcome to the show.
Nice to be talked with you, Aisha.
Yes, it's great to be with you. It's very nice to be actually broadcasting from Scotland, to be broadcasting from Dundee. So look, Alistair Clark there from the Dundee Courier gave us a kind of an overview of some of the politics in Scotland at the moment. Just talk my listeners through what the polls are saying in Scotland right now, John.
Well, on average, the polls have been conducted through the campaign, and they've not been that numerous, it has to be said. But the ones that we have had, including a couple in the last week, on average put the SNP on 36% with with the SNP on 32% and Labour on 36%. So the Labour Party are running about 4 points ahead. That suggests that perhaps the replacement of Humza Yousaf by John Swinney has helped to stem the slide in SNP fortunes, but no more than that. There's no evidence as yet that the change of leadership has meant that the electoral difficulties into which the SNP had got, both throughout Mr. Yousaf's tenure, but most obviously in the immediate wake of his decision to get rid of the Greens out of Bute House, in the wake of all of that, that Mr. Swinney is managing to repair any of that damage as yet.
And look, looking at where the polls are at the moment, also just talk to us about the Conservatives. How are they doing? Because they've had a difficult time of it as well with Douglas Ross. How are they looking in the polls?
Well, to be honest, it's too early to know what impact, if any, Mr. Ross's decision has had, because the polling that's come out this week basically predates that. The Conservatives at the moment, they're running on average at about 16%. That's about as bad as they have done previously in Scotland in actual general elections. So I think, as you've probably just been discussing, the Conservatives are basically on a defensive fight to hang on to the 6 seats they've got, some of them in the northeast, the others in the borders. It is their good fortune that their principal challenges in those seats are not Labour, as is the case in many places south of the border, but rather the Scottish National Party. And because the Scottish National Party has its own problems, as we have already just indicated, then maybe the Conservatives will hang on, not because their support's going to hold up. It's simply a question of which of the two manages to avoid falling the more, and therefore ends up being ahead. These are, for the most part, seats where Labour basically do not have any significant role in the electoral contest.
And that's really important just for listeners across the country who are not in Scotland. Like in England, there are some seats which are, Labour's hoping to take off the Conservatives. There are not that many. There are
no Conservative Labour marginals in Scotland. Absolutely zero. There are plenty of marginal seats in Scotland, but they are primarily marginal between the SNP and Labour, with the SNP trying to fend off a Labour challenge. And we have the Conservative seats, some of them quite marginal, they're defending against the SNP, and equally the SNP has some seats they're trying to defend against the Conservatives. It follows what I have said, that those SNP MPs who are facing a Conservative challenger are, for the most part, probably somewhat less worried about their seats than perhaps are virtually all of the SNP MPs who are facing a Labour challenger.
And look, let's just quickly mention the other parties as well. How are the Liberal Democrats doing? And what about the Scottish Green Party as well? Because how do you think they're going to do in this election? Do you think they may get some support from disillusioned SNP, people who are more progressive in the SNP, who like the policies on climate change and gender ideology?
Well, the Liberal Democrats are running at around 8% on average in the polls, but for them, basically, this is a few isolated local contests. Orkney and Shetland, most obviously, can they hang on to that? Fife North East, can Wendy Chamberlain win a seat, which, as a result of the boundary changes, isn't quite so good for them? Edinburgh West, can they manage to hang on to that? So can they recapture Joe Swinson's seat at East Dunbartonshire, which is from the SNP, which is probably a bit of a challenge, and can they hang on to the far northern Sun seat of Caithness and Southern, which again boundary changes has made somewhat more difficult for them. But that's basically the full list of serious Liberal Democrat interests in Scotland. Although the Democrats themselves took themselves up quite a lot in Inverness, but I have to say that it will require something fairly spectacular for them to do so there. As far as the Greens are concerned, well, to be honest, although the Greens are in the Scottish Parliament, that's essentially a consequence of the fact that we have a proportional representation system and they can pick up seats on the proportional element of that. They came a fair old cropper when they fought in the by-election in South Lanarkshire a few months ago. Typically in the polls, they're running at about 4%. So yes, they're enough to be a nuisance value to the SNP, insofar as at least some of their voters might go to the SNP, although Ipsos did this week put out some polling and asked them what Green voters what they might do otherwise. And it's by no means the case that all of them said that they would otherwise vote for the SNP. But
And then,
yeah, there's a certain nuisance value there for the SNP.
okay, and John, just briefly, a final question to you. I mean, just looking at the polls now, I mean, can you give us any estimation of how many seats you think Labour could pick up?
Yeah, I mean, it's at the moment it's not unrealistic for the Labour Party to be picking up around 30 seats or so, while the SNP may well find themselves with perhaps no more than around 18. Those are the kinds of figures we are probably looking at. Just have to bear in mind that, as I said, because there are quite a lot of these Labour SNP contests are marginal ones. If John Swinney can nudge his party back ahead of the SNP, that Labour tally starts to begin to fall quite noticeably. So there's still plenty for the SNP to fight for in order to try to minimise the damage.
And John, I absolutely loved the interview with you in the Times today. A really lovely interview. Were you pleased with it?
To be honest, I have not read it. I've been speaking at a festival in Perth today.
Well, I've read it for you. It's very lovely and very nice detail about your love of gardening and a good dig at the weekend, which is, I think, very good for everybody, your physical health and your mental health. John, as ever, thank you so much for your time. That was Professor Sir John Curtice there.